When you think about the American Revolution, what comes to mind? Probably battlefields, maybe some big formal declarations. But what if I told you another war was being fought behind the scenes? A war of ideas, of strategy, and intense personal sacrifice. And it was all captured in an incredible exchange of letters. We're going to dive into the private messages that helped shape a nation.
So get this, it's 1774, 2 whole years before independence is even declared, and Abigail Adams asks her husband John this absolutely chilling question. This just cuts right to the heart of it all, doesn't it? For her, this wasn't some abstract political thought experiment. No, this was about life, death, and what kind of country they were actually fighting for. And right at the center of this whole story are John and Abigail Adams. And they weren't just a married couple. They were a true revolutionary partnership, intellectual equals trying to navigate one of the most chaotic moments in history together. So on one side, you've got John Adams, down in Philadelphia, one of the loudest voices pushing for independence in the Continental Congress. And on the other, you have his dearest friend, Abigail, back home in Massachusetts. She wasn't just keeping the farm running and raising their kids in the middle of a war zone. She was his eyes and ears on the ground, and honestly, his most trusted political advisor.
You know, the word confidant is just perfect here, because it gets at the incredible trust between them. Their letters were like a secure channel, so where John could float new ideas, vent his frustrations, and get back this incredibly sharp, totally unfiltered analysis from the one person whose opinion he valued more than anyone else's.
So the war literally split them apart for years at a time. It basically created two different but deeply connected fronts. You had John fighting the diplomatic war over in Europe, while Abigail was holding down the home front in America. But make no mistake, they were fighting the exact same war.
And this really shows you their parallel worlds. While John's in Paris, desperately trying to get loans and build alliances, he's also getting super suspicious of the French. At the exact same time, Abigail is managing their farm, dealing with runaway inflation, and literally watching the smoke rise from the Battle of Bunker Hill from a nearby hilltop. Her letters from the ground gave John a dose of reality he just couldn't get anywhere else.
Yeah, John's time in Europe made him really cynical. He looked at the French court and didn't see a beacon of liberty. He saw a nest of self-interest and corruption. He was terrified that France didn't actually want a strong, independent America, but a weak little country that would depend on them. And that fear is what drove his next big move.
But while John was navigating all that European drama, Abigail was developing one of the most radical ideas of the entire revolution. Her experience on the home front, watching a new country and new laws get built from scratch, led her to make a really bold demand.
Okay, so we've all heard the phrase, right? Remember the ladies. It's iconic. But what was she actually asking for? I'm willing to bet it's not what you think. It's so crucial to understand the difference between the modern myth and the historical reality here. This was not a call for the right to vote. That idea was still way, way off. Abigail's demand was much more immediate and, frankly, more fundamental. Under the law at the time, a married woman basically had no legal identity. She couldn't own property. Everything belonged to her husband. Abigail was demanding an end to that kind of domestic tyranny.
And let's be clear, this was not some polite suggestion. It was a warning. She's making a direct link between the tyranny of a king over his country and the legal tyranny of a husband over his wife. That is an incredibly powerful and, for its time, truly revolutionary idea.
All right, so back in Europe, John's paranoia about French control forces him to make a move. He knew America couldn't bet its entire future on a single, kind of manipulative ally. So he takes on this hugely important mission to the Dutch Republic, hoping to get a new loan and, just as important, diplomatic recognition. But this mission was, well, it was a total long shot. The Dutch were practical merchants, not fiery revolutionaries. So John had to fight this constant flood of British propaganda that was painting the Americans as a bunch of failing rebels. Plus, the Dutch government itself was split, with a lot of pro-British sentiment. For a long time, as he put it, he was avoided like a pestilence.
For months, John made absolutely zero progress. I mean, his letters home are just full of frustration. But his sheer stubbornness, plus a huge geopolitical twist, finally gave him the breakthrough he needed.
So what was the turning point? Britain got angry that the Dutch were secretly trading with America, so they declared war on them. And just like that, the Dutch and the Americans had a common enemy. Public opinion shifted almost overnight, and suddenly everyone wanted to hear what John Adams had to say. He finally had his opening. And this medallion right here, this is the proof of his victory. It was created in 1782 to celebrate the Dutch Republic recognizing the United States as a free sister. This was a massive win. Not only did John get a critical loan, but he had secured recognition from a second European power. America was no longer dangerously dependent on France. So John won his big diplomatic battle. Awesome. But that intellectual battle he and Abigail were waging in their letters, that was far from over. Let's go back to their correspondence and see how that showdown played out. So when John got Abigail's powerful letter urging him to remember the ladies, how did this great revolutionary respond? He laughed. Seriously. He wrote back that he couldn't help but laugh and basically teased her about this new tribe that had grown discontented. He completely brushed her off.
But Abigail was not playing games, and she definitely wasn't going to be silenced. Her response is one of the most powerful lines she ever wrote. She warns him that arbitrary power is very liable to be broken. She's telling him straight up, the principles you're fighting a war for, the fight against unchecked power, they don't just stop at the front door.
So when you put it all together, what's the big takeaway here? The Adams letters give us this incredible, unfiltered window into the revolution. They prove it wasn't just one fight. It was a war on the battlefield, a high-stakes chess match in European courts, and a deep, philosophical battle over the real meaning of freedom, a battle fought right there in their letters.
In the end, John got his victory, but Abigail's revolution was really just getting started. Their letters show us that the fight against arbitrary power wasn't all settled back in 1776. Which kind of leaves us with a big question, right? What kinds of tyranny, big and small, did they leave for the rest of us to take on?